Hello and welcome to Friday's edition of Cracking the Cryptic, where I'm going to great lengths to keep out of Maverick's way today. I am in fact on holiday, but that doesn't mean the Sudoku joy should cease, because today I've got a puzzle for you it's by Jovial, called Burrows, and it's Jovial's most recent Sudoku, and of course Jovial was responsible for the Sudoku extravaganza that, seriously, this is a serious number, just shy of 1,000 of you have solved over on Patreon this month. And when you consider the Sudoku extravaganza consisted of 20 puzzles, that means 20,000 Sudokus have been solved by our patrons over the last few days. It is just a ridiculous number, and is a testament to how good Jovial Sudokus are. And that's why I'm quite excited about this one. Now, I apologise if the sound quality isn't quite up to snuff. I am on my laptop. Now, I have done laptop videos before, and I think they've been okay. So you'll have to just bear with me while I record on this for the next few days. Anyway, with that said, do I want to mention anything else? Yes, I do. Do check out our Sudoku Pad. This is our brand new app which allows you to enter your own classic Sudokus into our software and play them in our software. It's been the thing we've been asked about the most for the last 2 years. So that is now available, and if you've played any of our puzzles over the last 2 or 3 weeks, you should see some links on the screen to Google Play, App Store and Amazon, where you can download it, and I highly commend it to you. It also includes 12 puzzles that Mark and I made to sort of celebrate the fact, so some handcrafted classic Sudokus are included as a bonus. Now, with all that said, let's get on to Burrows and work out what the rules are. Here we go. We've got normal Sudoku rules apply. In cages, digits must sum to the small clue in the top left corner of the cage. Digits cannot repeat within a cage. So normal killer Sudoku rules, that means that those 5 cells there must add up to 22, and what you couldn't do, for example, would be that. And make those 3 squares add up to 20, because that will be wroggen. There will be 2 ones in the box, which is not a good idea. Other than that, digits along an arrow must sum to the digit in that arrow circle. So we've got normal arrow rules. That means those 2 cells there, whatever they are, you sum them and you put the result in the circle. And that's how arrow clues work. 1 given digit today. What a bonus. So do have a go. The way to play is to click the link under the video as usual. Now I get to play. Let's get cracking. Now, let's get cracking, and I'm almost tempted to tell you the secret straight away here, because I am noticing, well, there's a very profound symmetry in the grid between these sorts of patterns and its symmetrical counterpart over on the right hand side, look. And what I'm noticing is that every pair of these cages that make up this pattern sum to the secret being, of course, that if we look at a complete box of a Sudoku, by the rules of Sudoku, we know a correct solution will contain all of the digits 1 to 9 in the outlined squares. If you add up those digits, you get 45, which happens to be, look, the sum of those caged cells as well. And that means we have hypothetical arrows today, do we? By which I mean, if I know those outline squares add up to 45, but I also know those cells add up to 45, that implies that whatever this cell is implies those 2 cells must sum up to this square here in order for maths to work. Now, if those 2 squares add up to this square, that means we could draw, if I had the ability, which I don't, a little arrow that sort of came down here and covered these 2 squares. So these 2 squares add up to exactly the same total as those 2 squares. That sort of merits colouring, I think. Yeah, I am going to colour those in. I think I can remember that. Let's colour those in. And although that immediately has I don't know whether this is just for me, but I now can't see the arrow at all there. I can't use purple, I don't think. Let's try a different colour. Let's see if orange is better. Okay, I can now see the arrow still. So what we're saying here is that those 2 squares sum to this, and these 2 squares sum to this. which does put a little bit of a restriction on this cell, because what this cell now cannot be is a very small total, because if it is a very small total, there's only one way, for example, of making 2 digits sum to 4. And if there's only one way of the sum working, you'd have to put this 1 and 3 there and 1 and 3 there, which of course would break box 2. So that can't be 4 or 3. But it can be 5, look. Yeah, it can be 5. That's quite sweet in the sense that now these 4 squares have to add up to double 5, which is 10, which means they would be 1, 2, 3, and 4, and that does work, which is sort of good and bad. Yeah, well, okay, I can't see what to do up here, but I can see this is just working all the way down the grid, isn't it? We've got the secret here in the sense that those cells add to 45. So we know there's equivalence between those 2 squares and that square, because we know those squares add up to 45 as well. And they're the same as those squares. Now I've got to be careful about colours here. Let's try green. I can just about see that with green. I don't really want to use grey. I think grey will be worse because the arrow won't show up against it. Maybe red actually might be. I know red next to orange I don't like doing. Right, I'll stick with green. So we've got the same going on the right. So we've got these cells add up to 45 and these add up to 45. So these and these are equivalent, as are those 2. So these are also some set of colours. I'll use blue. Oh, blue's beautiful. Blue absolutely, well, it sort of makes the arrow radiate. So what have we got there? Have we got anything useful? Can we rule anything out? We've covered a lot of the real estate in box 5 now with coloured squares, with this square being in both sets, if you like. This square contributes to the value of this circle via this hypothetical arrow, and it contributes to this circle via this real arrow. I don't know. Let's have a look at box 8 and see if this one... Oh, this one's different. The circle is in the wrong place. Okay. So look, these squares add to 45, and those add to 45, which means that and these are the same total. I'll get away with red there. Oh, actually red's the best colour. Look, that shines as well. So hang on, we're saying that... so now that square has to be 6, 7, 8 or 9. And we know that because if we look at the structure of this arrow, obviously it's this circle here is the sum of those 2 squares. But in turn, we know this cell here is the sum of those 2 squares. So in fact, this arrow, this circle here is the sum of those 3 squares. And if you're summing 3 squares with different digits, these squares could be 1, 2 and a 3 as a minimum. 1, 2 and 3 add to 6, which means this square is at least a 6. I probably want to make those red as well, just to make sure we've sort of got some sort of consistency going on in the colouring. So this digit now, well, okay, that has to be at least a 3. And we know it's at least a 3 because it has to be the sum of 2 other cells. So if we make those 1 and 2, which would be the minimum, this would be a 3. So this is at least 3. Is there anything to stop it being a high number though? No, in fact it probably is a high number, isn't it? Because it's summing those 2 squares. So it could perhaps even be an 8. If that's an 8, this would be a 1. These 2 squares would sum to 8, and that looks possible. And the result of that calculation is that we get to say bobbins. This is weird then. So how exactly do we start this puzzle? Maybe I've got to use the fact that there's so many coloured cells in box 5. let's just have a think about that for a moment. That's probably not a stupid thought, because we've got 7 cells covered with colours. So if we minimise, that's Maverick just beeping his horn as he goes past. If we minimise these 7 cells, they would add up to 28. 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 plus 6 plus 7 is 28. And then we have to double count this square, whatever that square is. So let's make this square a 1. So we're double counting the absolute minimum number. That means the coloured squares here would sum to 29. Now that means those 2 squares have to sum up to 14.5, which I appreciate is not possible. Because of course these are sort of, you know, whatever's in there appears in there and there, so it sort of gets doubled as it comes into box 5. Right, okay, well that does allow us to, yeah, okay. I see a small restriction on these 2 squares. You can't put 5 into either of these squares anymore, because if you do, the maximum now, these 2 squares add up to is 14, which means the maximum, well, it means the exact total that these squares need to add up to is 28, with this counting double. Well, there's no way of making that work. Once you have to double this square, you can't make this, can't make the 8 cells that you're effectively adding up, because you're adding up the 7 plus this one twice. You can't make 8 cells add up to 28, because the minimum you can make 7 cells add up to is 28. So that means that these 2 squares have to be at least 6 as well. So this is 6, 7, 8 or 9. I'm not convinced that there isn't more we can do there though, because oh, I see. Yes, I see what you've done here. Okay, this is really clever. Yeah, the point is, oh, in fact, the point is I should have asked a different question first. But I've been led to the right answer by thinking about a totally different question. What I was thinking about was whatever's in these 2 squares has to find a home in this box. So if, and that got me thinking about 9s. If you put a 9 in one of those 2 squares, where does 9 go in box 5? But actually, forget that. Just ask where 9 goes in box 5. That's a good question, because what you can never do is put 9 on a 2-cell arrow, whether it's a hypothetical arrow or a real arrow, because if you do, the circle from which that arrow or hypothetical arrow emanates from will have to be at least 10, and that's impossible. So all the coloured cells immediately are not 9. That's not 9, that's a real arrow, because if it's 9, that square's got to be at least 10, so that's a 9. And that must be enormously powerful for our circles. Oh, this is gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous, because now I can get rid of 6 from there as well, because 6 plus 8 gives us the same problem that 5 plus 9 gave us. If you make those 6 plus 8, then we know the coloured cells have to add up to 28, because 6 doubled plus 8 doubled is going to be 28, and we can't make them add up to 28 given this square's got to be added twice. So now we get rid of 6 from these squares, and we now know that these squares have to add up to 30. We've got 7 plus 8 times 2, which, does that mean this square has to be a 2? Or can you, oh no, you can't, right. Yes, I think it does mean this square has to be a 2, because I think now the question we should ask, given these squares can only be 7 and 8, is where does the 8 go in box 5? Because now we can't put an 8 in a coloured square, because that would imply one of the circles should have to be 9. So 8 must go here. And if 8 goes there, that's going to give us a 1 and a 9 to make that arrow even possible. And just coming back to this so we now know that these squares add up to 28 because they are the digits 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7, and that's what that adds up to. But we know that overall the coloured squares have to add up to 30, so the only way of making that work is if you include a 2 here, so the 2 gets counted twice to bring us up to the total we need. And now this square has to be, oh, it depends what this square is. So this square is a 5 or a 6, depending on whether this square is a 7 or an 8. But this, remember that this is a hypothetical arrow coming from this square. So this square is a 5 or a 6 as well. So we've actually got a 5, 6 pair in box 5. That's extremely strange. But I don't think it's wrong. It feels correct. Now 8 looks tricky to place. Yeah, 8 is tricky to place in box 2. Because once this square can't be a 9, which it can't be by Sudoku, you can't put 8 in the orange squares. So 8 is in one of those 2 squares. And presumably that's putting pressure on this as well, which now... Oh yeah, this is this is just beautiful. This is just beautiful because let us think about what's the maximum we can now put in this square. It's obviously 7 because it sees 8 and 9. Now, if that was 7, what would these squares have to add up to? Well, double 7, that's 14. Now, what's the minimum I can make those squares add up to? Well, given I can't use 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 add up to 14. So this must add, this sort of means the maximum and the minimum are colliding in perfect equilibrium. And this must be 2, 3, 4, 5 in some order. And this must be 7. Because if we make it any less, if we make this 6, these 4 squares have to add up to 12, which is impossible given we can't include a 1 in the total. And this 7 is giving us, oh, I see, this 7 is giving us that one, and that's giving us that one, which is giving us this one and that one. And now this arrow has to be a 3, 4 pair, because it can't be 1, 6 or 2, 5. This is a hypothetical 8 arrow, which is a 1, 7 pair, look. And that is correct, because it's obviously adding up to 8, which is what we'd expect, but it is also the last 2 digits in box 5. Now you can't put 2 into either of those squares, which probably means given these arrows, you can't now put 5 in those squares. Now I've got a 3, 4, 5 triple in column 5, which doesn't actually put any pressure on the circle at the bottom. Oh, where does 7 go in box 2 though? It goes there by Sudoku of all things. So this is this is a 6, 8 pair to finish the box, and there's a 6 here. So that's a 6, that's an 8. 8 and 9. Look at 8s and 9s in boxes 2 and 5. They've got to find a home in those 3 squares. Can you put 8 or a 9? No. Right, okay, this is nice. Can you put an 8 or a 9 in this square? No, because remember that this square plus that square are all adding up to this square. So if you put 8 or a 9 here, this is definitely going to be a 2-digit number, so you can't do that, which means these 2 squares are exactly equal to 8 and 9. Which means that square's a 1 or a 7, and I bet that can't be a 7. No, it can't be. It's exactly the same problem. If that's a 7, the minimum I could add to it would be a 1 and a 2, which I can't even do. So this is going to be a double-digit number again. So this is a 1, this is a 7, this is a 1. Oops, my mouse is different as well, which means the right clicker is extra sensitive. So what does that mean? I haven't used my given 4 yet. What's that for? What's that for? 7 have got to be over there. 6 has got to be in one of those 3 squares, just by Sudoku. This column, we still need 2s, 3s, 4s and 6s into those positions. Let's actually take a look at that and see if we can do anything with it. Especially as those 3 squares add up to that one. Oh, this is lovely. Right, this is lovely. So is this 8 is the question we should ask. And the answer is no, it's not. Because given we can't include 5 in those 2 squares, the only way of making this 8 total work is if that is going to be a 3-4 pair. And it can't be a 3-4 pair because then this little cell is utterly broken. And we mustn't utterly break cells in Sudoku. So this is not a 3-4 pair. Well, it means that's not 8. This must be 9, therefore, which means this is 8. These 2 squares have got to add up to 8, which means they must be 6 and 2. Which means they must be 6 and 2, I think, which means that square is not a 6 or a 2. So this is a 3 or a 4. Whoops. Let's tidy up our pencil marks and stare again. 1, 2, 6 adding up to 9. This square here has got to be... Oh, I see. Right, so this can't be a 2. Because if that's a 2, the normal arrow rules work, and this would be a 7, which it can't be. Good grief. So this is a 6, this is a 2, this is a 3, and the 3 bounces back in here and gives me a 4, and a 3, and a 4, and that means that's not 4, and that's not 4, so there's a 3-5 pair in box 2, which means those aren't 3. Oh, I see, and now I've got either a 2-5 pair or a 4-3 pair in each of these positions. And a very strange looking grid is resulting here. These squares have got to be 3, 5 and 7. And the reason I'm saying this is a very peculiar grid is I have done an awful lot in columns 4, 5 and 6, but almost diddly squat in the rest of the grid. I've got exactly 5 digits placed and no pencil marks at all in the rest of the grid. So 7s I can see have got to go in those squares. But these cages are going to have to do some magic if this is going to solve. 4, this given 4, maybe this is important. It's got to go down there. Oh, so is that telling us that 4 is in the 22 cage? Aha, yes, here's something interesting. Look at the geometry of this 23 cage. It's got a 1 and a 2 in it, which means the 1 and the 2 can't repeat, or can't go in those 3 squares, because that would repeat those digits in the cage. So there is also a 1 and a 2 in the 22 cage, as well as a 4. That's not a 1 or a 2. So we know that 3 of the 5 digits in the 22 cage add up to 7. So the other 2 digits add up to 15. So they're either 6, 9, which would be incredibly useful because there's a 6, 9 pair here, so they'd be forced to be in those 2 squares. Or there's 7, 8, which looks like it might be much less restricted. How do we know that this is 6, 9 in here? The answer to that is unclear to me. Good Lord, I'm not actually seeing how to do this at all. I mean, I can see little things, like I can see a bit like this 1, 2 here. This 2, 5 has a similar effect, look. There must be a 2 and a 5 in those 5 squares, and that's adding up to what, 23. There must be a 1 and a 7 in these 5 squares. That one's not 7. Oh, good grief, and it's much worse up here because I don't even know whether this is 2, 5 or 3, 4, so I don't actually know what gets shifted into this 23 cage in box 1. Ooh. Row 5 maybe? We've got 1s, 2s, 5s and 6s to place. There's almost no restriction on these squares. I mean, that's 2, 5 or 6 because it sees the 1. This square is 1 or 6. That's actually more restricted than some of them. That square I think could be, I think these two peripheral squares, oh, no, yeah, I think these two squares on the periphery can be any of those 4 options. If this is 1, you've got 8 here, you need 40, oh, aha, right, okay, this square is the key maybe. That cannot be a 1. If that's a 1, these two squares have to add up to 14 to make the cage work, and they can't add up to 14 because the 6 has gone, so 6, 8 is not possible, and the 5's gone, so 5, 9 is not possible. So this is not 1, and that, I think it was a 6 was the other option, was it? Yeah, so that's a 6, which means that's not a 6. So these squares here are 1s, 2s and 5s. And this cage is now, it's got 13 in it, so those are adding up to 9, and they're not 2, 7, 3, 6 or 4, 5. So that is a 1, 8 pair, which means that's not a 1. Oh, I see. So now I can place the 1 in row 5 exactly there. Get rid of those cells. And so do I look at row 6 now then? I've got to place 3, 4, 7 and 9. Ooh, 3, 4, 7 and 9 into those cells, 3s, 4s, 7s and 9s. We know the 7 is over there, so we know that's not a 7, which we knew as well because we've got a given 7. So we've got 3s, 4s, 7s and 9s. So if we max these out, if we go 4, 7, 9, that's 21. Ah, okay, so this is not 4, 7, 9, because then this square would have to be a 1, which it can't be, which means one of these 3 squares must be a 3. So we've now got a 3 and a 7. We've got no 3 here anymore. If this is a 4, we've got 9, 7, 3 and 1, which is 20. This square would be a 2, which would be nice because that would fix that this square was a 2. And if that square's a 9, you've got 7, 4, 3, which is 14, 15. Ah, and that would be a 7, which is impossible. Good grief. Right, so this square here cannot be a 9 because that results in a 7 there, which clashes here. So this is a 4. Those squares add up to, let me just double check this. These add up to 20 now. That square is a 2. That square's a 5. That square's a 2. And we reach something like this position, I think, with these two squares having to be 4 and 6 to make the box complete. And let's check this cage adds up now. So we've got 15 plus 8, which is 23. Lovely. And therefore those 3 squares we now know are 3, 5 and 9. 17 and 6 is 23. Okay, so 2 and 4 there, looking down here. Oh, I see. Now the 22 cage comes into its own because we know there's a 1, 2 and a 4 in this 22 cage, and we now know the 2 and the 4 are not in those cells, which means we can get rid of them from those cells and push them into those squares. So this is a 2, 4 pair, which doesn't seem to do anything. We get a 2 in one of those squares. It's actually retained a lot of its difficulty. I sort of thought when we figured out the arrows, it would break apart, but it's doing anything but. So we've got a 1 vertical in column 9 now. So the 1 in box 3 is in one of 4 places. I mean, what on earth do we look at next? It still looks very likely that this 6, 9 goes here. Where do we look now? Sorry if everyone is seeing if there's an obvious place, but I am on holiday, so you've got to give my brain a break. This row, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Oh, C, yes, okay, that's strange and hard to see. They are a 3-5 pair. Wow, okay, and just so everyone's on the same page here, obviously those 5 squares are a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 quintuple in some order, but we've got a 1, 2, 4 triple looking up at this square, and we have got a 1, 2, 4 triple looking up at that square as well, because of the ones pencil marked at the bottom of the grid. So these 2 squares can only be 3 and 5, which means those squares have got to be 1, 2, and 4. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? Because I know that this square is now definitely not a 1 by uniqueness, which I don't normally allow myself to use. Why do I know this isn't a 1? Well, if it's a 1, not only does my computer fan turn on with indignation, but you'd have a 2-4 pair here and a 2-4 pair there, and there would now be nothing about the internal logic of the puzzle to differentiate why this solution to the puzzle was better than if we just switched the 4s and the 2s around. The puzzle would definitely have 2 solutions, and every puzzle you see on Cracking the Cryptic will not have 2 solutions, it will have exactly 1 solution. So uniqueness tells us this square is not a 1. But obviously, well, by convention, I would definitely use that if I was speed solving, which is fairly laughable after 32 minutes. But I will never use it when I'm actually solving, because I put myself in the position of having to prove there is a unique solution, which I know people prefer. So how do we prove that this square here is not a 1 if we don't use uniqueness? The way we do that is, how do we prove this is not a 1? Okay. I don't know is the answer, but I can see something interesting. Looking at this square, basically this square has 2 possibilities. I know it looks like it has 3, but I want to divide it into 2 possibilities. Either this square is a 2 or a 4, in which case there's definitely a 2 and a 4 in the 22 cage, or this square is a 1. But if this square is a 1, this is a 2-4 pair. And now where do you put 2 and 4? In row 3. You can't put them in those squares, and you can't put it here. So there's got to be there's got to be 2 and 4 in those 4 squares. So we actually know at this point that there is definitely a 2-4 pair in the 22 cage. We just don't know where it goes. It could be those 2 squares, or it could be this square and one of those 2 squares. But that means that we've definitely got... Oh, yeah, and that does what we need. That does what we need. Now we can eliminate the 1 here, because if the 2 and the 4 are in those 3 squares, this square would be a 1, and now the cage doesn't add up, because you'd have 1 plus 2 plus 4, which is 7. You'd need 15 in the other 2 squares, but this square is contributing to the total. And this square is not big enough. You need a square that's at least a 6. So that means this square is not a 1, and we have actually proved what we knew from the uniqueness point. Now in row 2, we know there's a 1 in one of those squares, so there's no 1 up there, which means there's a 1 in one of those squares by Sudoku. And now we've got 6 in the 22 cage. So we need these 3 squares here. Whoopsie, lost control of my control key. Those 3 squares are adding up to 16. So if that's a 3, you need these 2 to add up to 13 without being 7, 6 or 4, 9. These would be 5 and 8. That looks incredibly powerful. That looks incredibly powerful because they would marry up there. Give me a 5-8 pair there in box 7, which would be resolved. Wow. Okay, so if this is 3, the world and the universe comes into order, and that would be an 8, and this would be a 5. If that's a 5, though, you've then got 11 in those squares. You need 11 more in these squares without using 2, 9, 4, 7, or 5, 6. So this would be 3, 8. So, okay, so there's always an 8 in this square, and this square is always a 3 or a 5. That gives us a 3, 5 pair in row 3. Well, let's put the 8 in and see if that does anything first. We've now got, I see, we've now got an 8 in the corner and an 8 in one of those 3 squares in box 9. For a 3, 5 pair in box 1. Aha, and we've got better than that, because where do you put 1, 2 and 4 in box 1? The answer is only in those 3 squares by Sudoku. So this is a 1, 2, 4 triple. That gives us a 1, 2, 4 triple in row 1 now. Those 2 squares have got to be 6 and 9. That's not a 9 anymore. This square has got to be 3, 5 or 7. This square is 5 or 7. 5 or 7. There's a pair, a 5, 7 pair in row 8 now. This is very intricate indeed. Let's check this row then. So now we've got 1s, 2s, 6s and 9s to place. Oh, good grief. Right, I see. So this square here is a naked single out of nowhere, because let's just double check this. If we look at this row, we've got approximately placed 3, 4, 5, 7 and 8. So we need 1s, 2s, 6s and 9s. Now let's think about this square. Well, this square can't be a 1. We know there's a 1 in one of those 2 squares. It can't be a 2. There's a 2 in one of those 2 squares. It doesn't seem to be able to be a 6. So it must be a 9. Oh, I see. Right. And why is this 9 interesting? Well, now we know this cage. We know this cage had 2 cells that add to 15, which now are not actually 6, 9. They must be 7, 8. So the 8 must go there. And this must be a 1, 7 pair. And we've got a 5, 7 pair here. So this is 7, this is 1. And that might be the key to the puzzle then. So those 2 squares look like they are 5 and 6 maybe, to complete the box. There's a 6 there, so that's a 6, that's a 5, that's a 3. That's not a 5. So these squares are 3, 7 and 9, I think, in some order, and that one's not 7. And those 2 squares are just 2s and 6s, because we've got the 5, 7 pair to play with. Aha, and I can see something now in column 2, where look, I've got a 2, 4 and a 6 triple. This is, I mean, it's incredibly intricate. So that means that square can't be a 2 or a 4, that's got to be a 1. And that means, by Sudoku, that's got to be a 1, I think. And that probably puts pressure on this. Oh, this digit from row 9 is just a 3 or a 5. It's not a 5 from column 2, so that square is a 3. This square is a 5, that's a 7, that's a 3, that's a 9, that's a 7. That's a 9. That square now is a 5, I think, just to complete the box. That square's a 3. That square's a 5. This square's a 5. This square's a 9. This 3 is giving me the 3 and the 7 in this column as well. That 3 is giving me a 5 here. That's giving me a 3 here. That's giving me a 5 here. And now I can do my arrows. So that's a 2 and that's a 4. That's a 4, that's a 2, That's a 2, that's a 6. I mean, honestly, Jovial, when you came up with this, you must have been dancing around the room. This is just sensational. Now we've got a 1-4 pair here. 7 just placed by Sudoku using the power of this 7 at the bottom. Those squares have got to be a 3 and a 6, I think, which looks like that's doable. That's a 3, that's a 6. The 6 gives me the 6 and the 9. Now there's a 9 in that domino, which must go here. Now we know that square's an 8 to complete row 1. That's an 8, that's a 1, that's a 1, that's a 4, that's a 4, that's a 2, that's a 2. I'm going to click tick, and that's how to solve the puzzle. Good grief. Good grief. I mean, basically we did that with almost nothing outside these central columns. That was beautiful. In fact, the whole puzzle is beautiful. I don't know why it's called burrows, though. Is that something to do with moles or rabbits, or is it those shapes? Are they sort of burrowing into the middle somehow? I don't know. But I do know this is exceptionally clever. So the whole trick, I think, was to think about the coloured cells in box 5. Well, particularly once you'd thought about where 9 could go, actually, which I didn't think about terribly efficiently. But once you spot that 9 goes here, it puts such pressure on these circles, and the whole thing can sort of be built up from there. It's just beautiful. As always, loved it. Hope you enjoyed it too. Do let me know in the comments, and I hope the sound quality wasn't too bad. And we'll be back later with another edition of Cracking the Cryptic.